Grace, let me ask you a question. We're sitting here talking about how this is ridiculous, that he should have got an equal time. He doesn't answer the why question. You brought up KJP doesn't answer the why question. These are all legitimate discussion points. And to Steve's point, I think Hogan kind of echoed it, like he got pushed out, right? There's a democratic process that they were hanging their hat on 72 hours ago. 14 million people voted in the primaries and voted for him. And suddenly, like, forget that. Age was an issue. Suddenly we should forget all that. Okay, this is insane. Does it matter? Right? In other words, what I mean by that is, are we spinning our wheels talking about the past? The process was ridiculous. Are we yelling at the refs in the middle of the game while the game's still playing on issues, multiple, right? Equal time, all this, that don't actually affect anybody that's going to matter in this election? Or is it worth having this fight now?
You know, typically I would say no, but I think what makes this different is just the sheer amount of chaos that's been going on for the last 9 days. You had this attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Joe Biden was pretty absent for it. You had all these rumblings of, is he going to drop out? Is he not going to drop out? If he drops out of running, is he going to resign the presidency? Why can he still be in as president, but he can't run as president if there's not a health issue? And something I'll add in is that for someone who's, if there's someone out there who's not politically in the weeds per se, there's a feeling you get uneasy when there's no one there, when you're waiting 6 or 7 days and you haven't seen the president. It doesn't mean you love the president, you don't like the president. I don't mean that. I just mean there's a general concern when you're in the United States of America and there's people going, we haven't seen Joe Biden in 7 days. That's unnerving for people. I don't think it's a feeling that people like to have for a prolonged period of time. It's this kind of chaotic, you're not getting a clear message. And then, as Hogan and Steve pointed out, it's this pivot that I always feel like the Democrats used to be better about being a little bit more subtle. They used to work people into it a little bit more. The media was better at the nuance. And now it's just the drastic turn that I think is it's making people who aren't even that invested in politics go, wait a second. So is he running, or now we're supposed to be on board with her? And I just think in general, it's chaos. And I do think that resonates with people.
There was my favorite journalism professor when I went to Ole Miss was basically a Marxist atheist, but he would not let you put an editorialized word in a story, and he would fail you in 2 seconds. He was one of the best journalists I ever knew because he was a reporter in Memphis. And he always used to talk about kind of the cable wars, and he would say, people at home can't tell you what's wrong with a package, a story, a soundbite. They can't tell you if it's a little out of focus. They don't know what it is. They don't have the vernacular, but they know something's wrong.
Yeah.
And when they know something's wrong, they'll just change the channel. So it's incumbent upon you to have a good, tight story, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I think you're alluding to here, in that the American people don't know the nuances of, wait, there were 14 million voters and then they just flipped it. Are there rules? As if Democrats care about law and the rules, they'll just flip it. It doesn't matter. But they don't know what's wrong. They just know something's wrong, and it makes them uncomfortable. And then when they actually do tune in and they see Kamala Harris, you realize Kamala Harris, when she ran for president, was rated to the left of Bernie Sanders, a socialist, and Elizabeth Warren. She ranked 8th amongst black voters in the Democratic side of the aisle, behind Lily White, Vermont, Bernie Sanders, and fake Indian Elizabeth Warren. She went on a debate stage and called her opponent. This is after she had worked with Beau Biden for years and praised it and used it to her advantage, called Joe Biden a segregationist and a sex criminal, had T-shirts made, ready to go, still couldn't capitalize on it, and was out of the race shortly thereafter. Despite all of those failures and her positions on radical ideology, the media is still going to try to shove her down our throats again. And I would argue, while the minutia of this is fodder for us to talk about, and it will pass, the here and now is, she's going to be at the top of the ticket. She has some of the most radical beliefs in the history of presidential politics in this country. And every day we should spend pointing out that she uses pronouns when she introduces herself, that she is against fracking, that she tried to bail out Black Lives Matter rioters, didn't want to raise money for the folks who lost businesses and will never have a job again, or the families of cops who were targeted and killed by those rioters. She raised money for people to get out of jail who caused all of the destruction, $4 billion worth of damage. And those people got out of jail and committed more crimes. Those are the things we need to focus on to just expose her because, Sean, look, we all know this. Politics is the art of defining your opponent before they define themselves. You've got 4 weeks where the media is going to say she's the best thing ever. The campaign, the PAC, all of us need to be out there saying, no, this is who she is. Hear her own words. Show that to the American people. And I think she's going to have a really tough time because as this goes on, the more she talks, the more she is out there, the more unlikable she is. And I think they're going to run kind of the Joe Biden, Steve, you and I know this well, the 2020 campaign, put her kind of in the basement and keep her very scripted on teleprompter.
Steve, what do you think of that?
So listen, I think I'm very glad that Hogan brought up the 2020 race because I think that is important and very revealing because remember in that primary, that Democrat primary, the media clearly identified Kamala as their darling then, and they gave her absolutely fawning coverage and it didn't work. She didn't get anywhere. I think when she dropped out, she was polling at 3%. She didn't even make it to the Iowa caucus. She literally couldn't even make it to actual voting. That's how poorly she performed despite again, having all of the possible tailwinds possible from the corporate media. So I think the proof is in the pudding. I mean, voters rejected them. Those are Democrat voters, by the way. Democrat voters who you would think might be more open to her radicalism. But they were having none of it, including black voters, by the way. No appeal with them. So I think that it's instructive. It's going to be, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it at least rhymes. I think it's going to happen again this time. The media, again, is going to try their best to create, in their view, to fashion her into some sort of a female Barack Obama. But that's just not going to work. She's way too radical. She's way too unlikable.
I want to ask, sorry, Steve, I just want to ask you a question because this is something I've been thinking of. I don't have the answer. Somebody asked me this today. So she doesn't go to Congress, right, to see Bibi Netanyahu, Israeli prime minister's address. And in my opinion, no matter how you feel about Israel, I happen to be very pro-Israel, but no matter how you feel about Bibi Netanyahu, whatever, I thought optically it was a bad move because to be there and to be forward facing and to see a lot of people, it kind of cements the fact that she's presidential or that, she can be in a room with, that's a lot's going on. And the reason I bring this up is because I saw that and I went, wow, once again, as you pointed out from 2020, her political instincts are always wrong. And that's not something that's unique to her. It happens a lot in this administration. But the part I can't figure out is there no one on her team? Is there no one around her that's savvy enough, like the Pod Save America bros? Are there no holdovers from the Obama years who go, hey, I know you don't love Bibi Netanyahu, but this is a good thing to be at. This is something people are going to be watching. You want to be out there. Like, where are the people who can direct her? Because is everyone on her team that out to lunch as well?
Right. Well, listen, it's a great question. And we don't know if that's the case. Does she get terrible advice or no good advice from them? Or is she just disagreeing and just saying, no, I'm doing it my way and her way is the wrong way in almost every case. So, we don't know the answer to that yet, quite honestly. But I think it is clear that and by the way, regarding team, it's clear that she's not a very good boss, right?
Yeah.
We know from the turnover in her own office, in the vice presidential office, that people do not work for her for long. They apparently do not like working for her. So that's certainly part of the problem. And then in addition to that, in addition to probably having a very poor team and an unhappy team, her own, to your point, her own political instincts are just incredibly poor. Look, most Americans don't know Kamala Harris yet. That's the reality. Those of us who are so into politics, right? We know all about her, okay? But most regular Americans who are busy with their lives and aren't political freaks or political nerds, they don't know much about her yet. Our job, I believe, those of us in the movement, our job now is to expose who she is. And once we do, I think they're going to absolutely firmly reject her.
I think that, Grace, I actually love the point that you just brought up because we keep hearing about, she's meeting with Netanyahu today, but that opportunity to stand at the rostrum and look presidential, preside over, you don't say anything, but there's an imagery to it. And I think that's a really good point that you're making, is that I get she wanted to show the Michigan primary voters that are pro-Hamas. We'll talk about that hopefully in a minute. But she wanted to show them, see, I'm not going. But I think she missed an opportunity. And by the way, you want to talk about another excuse where the media gave her a pass. They were like, oh, she had a scheduling conflict. Do you really think that they organized this joint address of Congress without running it by? That's how it works. The Senate signs off as well. She's the president of the Senate. The media was like, oh, she had another event. She had to be with her former sorority sisters. I mean, she knew about this. They signed off on the date. They knew it. And yet, again, the media pass over pass. Before we continue, I want to talk about something real significant that happened this morning that plays into this. Before I do, we keep talking about running. Well, I might be able to run as fast as I used to, but I do a lot of walking and training. These are my Gravity Defyer shoes. Oh, my God. What a game changer they have been. As you guys know, I'm getting along. Not Joe Biden old, but I'm, getting there, and I've got hip and knee and shoulder, every issue, right? But I still like to be outside, and these Gravity Defyer shoes, the cushion and support they give me is like nothing I've ever felt before in my life. They've got Verso technology, which is like this stuff that a trampoline's on, and when you walk, you feel it. It's like a cushion. It has really changed the not just the ability to walk, because I'm pretty able, right? But the comfort that I get in going out and going for a walk or going to the gym or whatever. I've got a pair that's just for running, but if you go to the website, gdefy.com, you can see they've got sandals, they've got training shoes, running shoes, or whatever. If you go to gdefy.com right now and use Spicer30, you get $30 off your $150 order. Trust me when I tell you this, it is going to be night and day, and you will never go back to another pair of shoes when you try these Gravity Defyer shoes. The technology, the support, they've got custom orthotics that come with it. Unbelievable change in how you experience walking, training. I've got, like I said, another pair for running. Love them. Anyway, let me get back to this conversation, because one of the things that came up, guys, this morning that I don't think is going to get covered a ton, but China and Russia are doing these exercises. They got intercepted by U.S. military as close as they've ever come to Alaska. This calls into consideration, this goes back to the speech. These guys are testing us right now, I believe. That's my theory. But we've never seen anything like this before, and I believe in the next few months, I'm really worried about our national security, Steve Cortes.
Yeah, listen, I think it's a super important point. And of course, with your military background, you know this better than most. The bad guys of the world know that they have from now until January with a totally incapacitated American commander-in-chief. That's really, really frightening. We have, and I think you mentioned this earlier, Sean, we have a national security crisis right now, not in the future, not in a few weeks. I mean, presently, we have a national security crisis because it is clear that Joe Biden is incapacitated. So he needs to resign. And I think we need to continue. Look, so many of us, particularly those of us who have campaign backgrounds, we're immediately pivoting to Kamala Harris, which is understandable, of course, right? And how do we expose who she is to the American people? But as patriots, putting aside partisanship, as patriots, I think we also need to, at the same time, and we can do both, also continue to hammer the point that Joe Biden is not fit to be commander in chief. By the way, to combine the two issues of national security and politics, I also find it amazing that he wouldn't do Kamala Harris just the political favor of making her president. I mean, if you're bowing out of the race anyway, why would you not bestow that upon her? Number one, he could claim the history making of essentially anointing the first female president ever. But number two, she becomes President Harris, which is a very different way to run and a much stronger position to run. I think, again, it's very revealing that he will not do that for her, even outside of course, the more important national security considerations of having an incapacitated commander in chief.
Yeah, I think there's this balance between wanting to take that credit, which I've always argued is the legacy that he'll leave of appointing people because of their identity versus their qualifications, but wanting to cling to power for the last several months to get all that straight. Grace, we saw President Trump at this rally in North Carolina go after Kamala. He says, I'm not going to be a nice guy anymore. The media went nuts. Oh, here's Trump again. And I'm like, no, that's how Trump always is. And B, what did you want him to do? Be like, I want to welcome her. I sent her a Blue Mountain greeting card today and edible arrangement. I mean, well, this was insane. What are they supposed to sit back and wait? He was defining her yesterday. He stuck to policy. I thought this is exactly what you're supposed to do in a campaign. And the media went nuts.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with listeners on my show where I've been and there was a really good piece by Bonchi in Red State where he said the same thing, like Trump this is a change. This is a different candidate in every single way you could imagine. She's not an 81-year-old man who can't put a sentence together. The campaign has to shift accordingly. And I think what you just said, keeping it about policy, keeping it about the parts of this administration that she's tied to, which also happen to be the worst parts of this administration, her incompetence, all of those things, and steering away, which I think is hard for Trump to do, but he's been showing a little growth in that area, steering away from the personal attacks, steering away from the things that might turn off women voters who we do need, and really making it about the impact that she's had in the last 4 years in this country. And I get grief when I say that. People call up and say, well, how come they can, make all these jokes about Trump, and how come they can do this? And I had a caller yesterday, and I said to him, when they make those jokes about Trump, when they take those really low-hanging fruit, kind of grotesque jokes or memes, does that change how you feel, or does that make you more adamant that you want to vote for Trump? And the caller said, well, it doesn't change how I feel. And I said, right, so it's not an effective way of trying to convince people that you're the best candidate. Trump needs to define her for her policies. He needs to define her for what she stands for. I think Hogan did a great job of that in the beginning of the show, listing all of those things. There's plenty there to go with without making it seem mean, if that makes sense.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.